So, all right, folks, this one is shorter. I guess you can figure out why. So,
Sorry.
yeah. How many of you actually got a chance to watch this episode this time? Fair enough. Fair enough.
Oh, no idea.
Not recently.
I mean, yeah, but I mean, I have faith in your ability to recall it. I do, because it's only a paper moon is possibly one of the best episodes of Deep Space Nine, and it's certainly one of the late Aaron Eisenberg's best performances. It's clearly an exploration of the effects of post-traumatic stress disorder, but I think there's a great metaphor here to explore in the nature of redemption and just taking a moment, really, to think a little bit before we move into facing whatever the next challenge might be. But before we get to that, I really want to put this episode, as always, in the greater context, like we've done for every single other episode. So Deep Space Nine is a little bit different than other Trek series in that it takes place nearly entirely within the same geographical area, centered around the station, Bajor, and the wormhole. Obviously, there's some geographical displacement that goes on, but the important thing here is that there was a war with another major power called the Dominion. Initially, the war went bad for the Alpha Quadrant powers, including the Federation, until Commander Sisko manipulates the Romulans into joining. The addition of the Romulan Star Empire turns the tide, and the alliance of the Federation, the Klingons, and the Romulans manages to drive the Dominion back, crippling the Cardassians and the Breen in the process, as well as the Dominion. Admittedly, recognizing the names of the various species isn't really all that important for our purposes, but what is important is that the station, Deep Space Nine, is particularly strategically important during the conflict because the station guards the terminus of the wormhole through which the Dominion travels to the Alpha Quadrant. The station itself serves as a melting pot of all the species, Alpha and Gamma Quadrant alike. And unlike previous franchises, a fair number of species on the station aren't even members of the Federation. Nog is a Ferengi, which is an important element to understand here. The Ferengi aren't Federation members, they're entirely independent and are therefore not subject to Federation laws or even mores. Their culture often gets reduced to just being about acquisitiveness, but Deep Space Nine develops them into a full-fledged culture with their own beliefs and values in which Nog is steeped. Nog and his family live on the station where his uncle runs a semi-profitable bar that had been in place since the Cardassian occupation. However, once the Federation and Starfleet take control of the station, Commander Sisko coerces the Ferengi family to stay, and that decision means that Sisko's son Jake and Nog have the opportunity to become fast friends. That ongoing exchange, even to the point where Jake teaches Nog to read, facilitates growth for both Nog and Jake. But what's most important is that it broadens Nog's horizons in a profound way. He sees that he can do something beyond the future he'd imagined for himself, and he goes for it by joining Starfleet. He's the only Ferengi in history to do so, and it ends up being good for both Nog and Starfleet, really. However, that decision puts Nog at the forefront during the Dominion War, and he accompanies Sisko, Worf, Ezri, Bashir, and his uncle Quark to AR 558, which will become the scene of a protracted, inasmuch as a 45-minute episode can demonstrate protracted and bloody siege by Dominion forces. And as you no doubt guessed, or are about to learn, from today's episode, Nog loses his leg in that battle, and the trauma has him thinking about his own future, his mortality, and even his uncle's sage advice, which, by the way, may actually be one of my favorite speeches in all of Star Trek. What Quark says is, "Let me tell you something about humans, nephew. They're a wonderful, friendly people, as long as their bellies are full and their holosuites are working. But take away their creature comforts, deprive them of food, sleep, sonic showers, put their lives in jeopardy over an extended period of time, and those same friendly, intelligent, wonderful people will become as nasty and violent as the most bloodthirsty Klingon. You don't believe me? Look at those faces. Look at their eyes." So after this experience, Nog comes back to the station, drowning a bit in his trauma. And though his friends and family try to surround him with love, Nog can't quite face it or them. He's not really in a place for it. So he escapes into a beautiful fantasy world. And make no mistake, it is beautiful, full of the richness of 1962 without most of the darkness from the 60s. But Vic's right. Nog can't stay there forever. Nog can't escape real life, even if he does miss his father's promotion party. The point is that Nog must reconcile himself with his own mortality. After refusing to talk about it for most of the episode, Nog finally tells Vic. And then suddenly, Dr. Bashir is telling me he has to cut my leg off. I couldn't believe it. I still can't believe it. If I could get shot, if I could lose my leg, anything can happen to me, Vic. I could die tomorrow. I don't know if I'm ready to face that. If I stay here, at least I know what the future is going to bring. In that speech, Nog presents the crux of the issue. He's been changed irrevocably by his experience at AR 558, and part of that is coming to grips with his own potential death. We're rounding into the final days of Lent, which is a lesson about repentance, certainly, but it's also, I think, about facing death. It's not accidental that we choose to mourn Jesus' death before we can celebrate his resurrection. I suppose I'm a little strange. Well, maybe a lot strange, really, but we're just going to go with it. But I have to confess to you that my favorite Jesus is not actually the Jesus of the resurrection. For me, the most powerful moment in the story is when Jesus prays, "Father, if thou be willing, remove this cup from me." It's a powerful image, right? Jesus is alone, having sent away his disciples so they won't see him wrestling with what is to come, because he knows. He's aware of what awaits him, and he has this moment when he asks that it not be him. He asks not to have to face that future, and that's the most human moment in the entire story. It's easy to forget amidst the teachings, the wisdom, the miracles, that the entire point of the incarnation is that God must become human. God must face the same fear of death we do. And while Jesus also knows what awaits him after death, putting him well ahead of most of us, I might add, this moment of doubt is the same one we all have to face. Jesus's experience here reaches all of us and forges a connection with every person that has ever walked the earth. If Tennyson's Ulysses is a part of everyone he encounters simply by virtue of having met them, how much more intimate is it to share this same experience? This is God meeting us halfway, or more than, really. I see the same fear being recreated in Nog when he speaks to Vic and when he retires into the holosuite. Again, I'm not saying that Paper Moon takes its inspiration directly from the Bible, but there's still a message here about fear. Nog lets his fear isolate him from everything, though I don't want to give the impression that Nog's suffering renders him weak. I think he's wrestling with a lot, and yes, the episode's underlying theme calls back to PTSD and what it can do. I mean, Aaron Eisenberg spoke quite a bit, actually, about how soldiers would tell him after this episode aired that they saw themselves in Nog. Nog even gave them a little bit of hope, which is, when you think about it, an incredible gift. And that's the other big underlying theme that I find in Lent: hope. Even as we wrestle with mortality and heady concepts such as sin and guilt, we know that Easter Sunday is coming. There will be a resurrection. Jesus will arise, bringing our salvation with him. Nog, too, manages to wrestle with his inner demons successfully. He learns to accept his biosynthetic leg as his own, and he rejoins the rest of the crew on the station. And there's something to that as well, right? We spent a lot of time over the last couple of weeks talking about the importance of community and the reciprocal obligations it imposes on us as Episcopalians and hopefully moral people. But I think it's just as important to recognize the necessity of taking time for yourself, time to process. I don't know if anyone else remembers the kitschy "What Would Jesus Do" bracelets that so many people wore as a demonstration.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And it was a demonstration of a faith they did not necessarily always live.
Yeah.
And I'm really proud of that because I know the people who wore those bracelets. By the way, this is my entire diplomacy degree coming to vest right now. But I think of those bracelets when I think of Jesus' time on the Mount of Olives, because Jesus has to take a moment to collect himself. I mean, he literally slinks off to have a minor breakdown about this. And it's okay. I mean, he pulls himself together. Nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. So does Nog. But to do it, they both have to work through their fears before they can rejoin life as it goes on. Lent sometimes feels to me like 40 days of this kind of breather. My Lent has admittedly not been spent in quite so nice accommodations as Vic Fontaine's 1962 casino, and I'm pretty sure Jesus's quiet prayer spot didn't offer him martinis shaken, not stirred. But the where isn't really the point, and neither is the how. Nog does casino books while he processes. Jesus prays. The point is that we make the effort. The point is that we do grapple with our demons. I'm reasonably sure Jesus meant something a bit different when he reminds us that he that taketh not his cross and followeth after me is not worthy of me. But I'm of the opinion that part of that cross is facing that ultimate fear. We have a responsibility to ourselves and our community to make the effort. In Nog's case, that responsibility took the form of his oaths to Starfleet, but mine is to my children. Jesus's was to every person who has ever and will ever live. Bit bigger on his end, must admit. Vic tells Nog that if he stays inside the holosuite, he'll die bit by bit as he loses pieces of himself. Excuse me. It's harsh advice, but he's not wrong. Neither is he without empathy for Nog's plight. And God has that same empathy because God has been exactly where we are. God sympathizes with our fears because Jesus has been there and felt that fear. But despite that, the expectation remains that we'll get it together and walk out of the holosuite or down the mountain or away from the computer screen. We have promises to keep and obligations to fulfill, so we cannot allow that trauma, that fear, to turn ourselves into the other. Fulfilling those promises might mean letting go of some of our naivete or of finding a way to control our behavior. It can take the form of reaching out to help someone who might not deserve it, but whose plight necessitates our action. It could also take the form of helping someone just because they need it, or of accepting that help ourselves. Sometimes fulfilling those obligations demands that we sacrifice ourselves for the greater good. Whatever form that fulfillment takes, God will be there. And I hope the Federation will be waiting. And that's it. That's all she wrote. I do want to take a moment and thank everyone who has come on this journey with me. I know it might not have taken the form any of us expected, but it's been a valuable experience for me, and I hope for y'all as well. And thank you, Mama Valerie, for giving me this space and this forum to talk about my favorite fandom. I very much enjoyed it, and I am possibly more grateful for the opportunity than y'all know. So, thoughts?
I love it.
Wow.
Yes. That's my first one. My second one is I have to thank you. When I suggested this and some of the staff got very excited and said, oh, this could be really great, you were the first one to come to my mind. There's no one better at Star Trek.
I mean, to be fair, no.
Or connecting it to the Episcopal way. And so it's been fabulous. But we're not finished discussing this particular episode, so I just wanted to say thank you too.
Yes.
So
I never would have thought, to put Star Trek with Lent, but it worked. But you made it work.
So we talked about stories before and how important they are. And I think the stories that we tell each other, whether it be Star Trek, whether it be the Bible, whether it be whatever, if it's a good story, then it's going to resonate. and it's going to pull some of these elements together. So it wasn't really, I mean, once I started thinking about it, because admittedly, combining Star Trek with religion or faith, Christianity is not normally where my brain would have gone. But once I started thinking about it and looking at it, there are a lot of the same themes in the ultimate drive that we need to do better. Like we need to do good in our world, whatever that form may take.
And I like the
To religion.
kind of what it's, you were saying about all the different types of people. I mean, they were really different on this, but, you know, but, and yes, everybody's different and we may not look as strange as they did, but we all have commonalities. And I think it really brought that out. Of course, it didn't hurt that I was in love with James Darren when I was in high school.
He's such a wonderful, wonderful addition. You know, he was supposed to be, his character was supposed to be a one-off character, and then James Darren came on and just blew everybody away, and he became a recurring visitor. They'll later have another episode where Nog saves Vic from his own program. It's, yeah, he was just great.
For me, I'm not a great fan of sci-fi series kind of because, you know, for me, it's hard to connect to machines or robo stuff or all these things. When Valerie said that we would be doing the Christian formation or education through this series, I was thinking I'm not at all a right fit into this. But then when you started off, like, you know, explaining the details, and I was really surprised the way how we can still connect to some theological themes and also to human emotions, even in people, like, you know, where we see the characters who are like aliens, you know, but still how we can relate to them. And so that was really amazing for me. I didn't get to watch a lot of, the episodes, but still from your talk, I could, you know, understand and connect. Thank you.
I am glad. I am glad that you could, and I really sincerely hope that you get a chance to watch them. Some of them are pretty terrible, not gonna lie.
Yeah.
Some of them are amazing.
Yeah, I'm glad you introduced me to, at least to some extent, to be open, not to completely shut down and say, oh, this doesn't belong to me, like, you know.
Fair enough. Like I said, a good story is a good story, wherever it's set.
Yeah.
I was watching this last night, and as a therapist myself, I kept looking and thinking, what would I do? What would I do with somebody who was expressing what Nog was expressing? And I don't know. I don't know. But I know that was going through my head the whole time. And it's so interesting that when we forget to focus on what we don't have, he didn't have his leg. When he wasn't focusing on that anymore, it just became part of the background for him. And I think that for me, that's part of focusing on the positive. Like, if you're not always thinking about what you don't have, and instead focus on what you do have and do with it what you can. So I don't know, that a lot of last night was Janet, the counselor, trying to figure out what I would do with this client.
And I think that's a really good point, because, you know, ultimately Nog can't change what happened to him, right? Like, none of that he can change. But what he can change is how he responds to it. And the problem was, I think, for Nog, that he didn't know how to make that change until he worked with Vic, until he had the space away from everything and in a very different environment for him to sit down and work through it. Because I mean, yeah, he's doing casino books, but let me tell you, any single Ferengi could have done those books in their sleep. Because that's the point of the Ferengi, right? Like the Ferengi are, they're supposed to be acquisitive. They're supposed to be, I mean, originally they started out as some vaguely racist Jewish stereotypes and then just kind of grew from that into a really fascinating culture. But like they worship, for example, we get a sense that they have something called the divine treasury when they die. And so you go to the treasury and then you have to take all the things that you've amassed in your life and bid with the celestial auctioneers for a new life. Like that's who these people are at their base. And so that didn't really give Nog, I think, the framework that, you know, maybe someone from the Federation or someone from Starfleet would have, you know, would have had. And he talks about, you know, physical therapy and also some emotional therapy that he was doing, and none of it was quite working for him. And I think some of that was culture clash in the sense that, you know, like you, those therapists were trying to figure out how are they going to reach Nog, and finding a way to do that, I don't think happened in this case.
Well, he was basically saying, why me? Why did this have to happen to me? And you could, you know, Jesus saying, can you pass this on to somebody else? Why me?
Right.
You know, accepting that that's what he's going to do. I'm not saying Nog was in that same situation, but, you know, at some point he accepted his, you know, his experience. This is who you are now. And we move forward. People don't always do that. Some people stay.
Yeah.
I think it helped when he found out, you know, this is something he could do that was important to someone else and he felt needed. And then he could excel at it. And I think that changed. Well, that's when he was going up and down the stairs and not even paying attention to his leg. So I think that was important to him to feel like he was excelling at something and needed to do.
I mean, I think honestly, I think about, so I do godly play, or I used to do godly play years ago. And at this point in the godly play cycle is when we talk about the different faces of Jesus. And one of the most interesting days that we talk about is Jesus comes out of the wilderness to do his work. And one of his jobs essentially was to make people, to get close to people no one else wanted to get close to, and to make them whole. And I think it's really interesting that even though he is not physically whole, Nog is whole. Right? This is what Jesus does. He comes into people who a lot of other people have kind of given up on, let's be honest, and heals them in a way other people can't. He touches something to make them realize who they actually are and how complete they are as they are. Just an interesting thought.
Nog does have to, Nog, that's the other thing. You're right. Nog has to grapple with. He's got to figure out how to be Nog now. Like, what does this new Nog look like Janet was talking about? And part of that is accepting that life is going to be a little bit different. You know, things aren't quite going to go back to where you thought where they used to be.
I'm familiar.
Right?
I mean, that's kind of what Jesus does, right? He takes everything we think is normal and he just flips it.
I think even for himself a bit.
Actually, in this episode, he becomes more than he ever was.
Yeah.
Ferengi, he was, you know, the characters, the race are motivated by profit and not relationship. So it's a self-focus rather than an other focus. And through this episode, he is transformed into a character who has more than profit as a priority. And he comes out more than whole. He comes out better than whole.
Oh, yeah. No. Oh, that's much better. I like that much better. Better than whole. Like, he makes them what they can be, not what they were.
And beyond what anybody could have imagined.
Of course. Fantastic.
Because there's a really great sequence in an episode preceding this one where Nog is auctioning off all of his childhood goods in order to like amass capital to go on to the next stage of his life. This is apparently a Ferengi thing. And Worf, who is himself a Klingon, right, is standing there and he says, I don't know about this. It's a Ferengi in Starfleet. And Chief O'Brien looks over at Worf and goes, you know, somebody said that about Klingons, I bet, when you started.
Lots of times.
Right. And it's interesting because, you know, what I love is the reciprocity in this. There's, you know, you don't see it in this episode, and that's I think part of the problem with, you know, taking individual episodes like this is you don't see like the bigger plot arcs. But later, Nog will use his very Ferenginess to acquire necessary materiel for the station repairs and the war effort. It's something. God, it's like Latinum faith in the Great River or something, and it's great because Nog manages, and it's only Nog could have done it the way he does, and so he teaches Starfleet a little bit about what it's like to be a Ferengi. So there's this great kind of cross-pollination that goes on here, which I also really love, because it's not necessarily that Nog is awesome because in spite of being Ferengi.
Right.
It's that's just part of the awesomeness.
I mean, which is kind of God's grace in a nutshell, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, he loves us as we are, as we come to him, not as we should be, and plugs us in. I mean, how many people have been plugged into my life in places I didn't expect it? Like Marie.
Right? I was kind of thinking, you know, like,
still saying,
you know, like, if Mom hadn't started drinking, I don't really know that we would have met.
Wait a minute.
Now Ganan speaks up.
Yeah.
I mean, I say, well, she's only offended because I'm implying that this was a recent starting date.
No. We've been on a cruise together.
Yeah. In Ganan's box are two people. And so
yes, there are two of us here. Sorry. I know that's hard.
Yeah.
So that's Stephanie Carroll, everybody.
Yeah, hi.
Well, I was going to make a comment about the Ferengi-ness of Nog and Quark, and like you were talking about, when he begins to be able to use the quality that everyone hated them for. The Ferengi were pretty much distrusted and hated because they were called thieves. They would take anything. They had to acquire, and they'd take it by any means. And so they weren't well trusted or liked. But when he takes the very thing that makes him Ferengi and makes it available to the community for the greater good, then he and they are transformed. And it's a wonderful way to approach when we have prejudice against a race for a particular thing, and how redemptive that thing actually is when it's properly managed by the person and the person's community. I should say properly understood, not managed.
Yeah. So that was part of Nog's struggle. Like, you remember that in this episode, Nog's father gets a promotion to maintenance technician first class. This is a huge deal because Rom Nog's father has been, you know, his brother's whipping boy, whatever, for quite some time, because not Ram is not good at profit, and so he's not a good Ferengi. And one of the arguments that Nog makes to Cisco when he's asking Cisco for a recommendation to Starfleet Academy is he says, look, my father could be the chief engineer on any starship and he would be amazing. But all he's ever known, all he's ever been taught is that he has to do all of these things for profit. I don't want to do that. I want to do something different. And that's the argument that clinches it for Cisco.
Right. It's redemption.
Yeah.
In your face.
Which is, you know,
It's laying down your nets and walking out of the boat.
And that's what Len's about, really, right? I mean, is, you know, thinking about, or at least for me anyway, and it has certainly become more so as a result of writing these lectures. But it's thinking about where I fit, both, you know, in terms of my immediate community and, you know, like the community that God is, you know, prepared for me to walk to or whatever. And then also how being part of that community affects my ideas of what I am and what I should be and how I can be better.
By not by being other than you, but by being completely
right.
Right.
Because if I just, because that's the other thing, right? Like Nog's the one who makes the decision to turn away from the community that's being offered to him. And yes, he needs that space for sure. Like that's a wonderful thing to do, is to set these boundaries. But you know, you can, and I have for sure, let things that have happened to me separate me and become othering. And I find that the way back is to remember that I am part of a community and to reach out. And so I've been thinking a lot about that over the last month or so.
Yeah.
And it's to also allow others to reach out to you and accept a handout from you.
I wish you'd been here last week.
I was with children last week.
Oh no, you had better priorities. I'm not arguing, but but that's exactly what we talked about last week, was how to accept help.
It's sometimes hard to do that. I mean, I think, you know, people will say to me, oh, I could never ask people for that kind of help. I said, well, would you want to help somebody if they were in that situation? Oh yeah, absolutely. I said, well, you know, don't deprive them of the joy of helping you. Let them help you, you know. So.
Yeah, no, it's frequently so hard because it asks you.
There goes the baby.
Yep. That is William. William is unhappy with his life right now. I don't know why, but he is.
Oh, bless her.
Robert had to come in and get the world's fattest cat and take her for dinner. So that's why you can hear them. But anyway, getting back to the point, I swear. You know, like it requires vulnerability, and it's vulnerability that we don't often want to share with other people. But the other thing Jesus does is, you know, Jesus is like, ha ha ha, yeah, that's cute, but it's required.
Yeah. We have to give up power. We have to give up power, because power is not what Jesus wants us to have.
And it's not
okay, let me rephrase that. Not the kind of power we associate with the word power.
Right? Like it's not real. It's not a real thing. If anything, it's an illusion that we create to separate ourselves from everyone else.
Yeah.
Yeah. It can be a protective device.
Yeah.
In
as well.
part. In
Yeah.
part. I think. And, you know, that's not what that is, right? Like, I mean, you know, and I think maybe I think part of what makes faith really scary is that you have to open yourself up to, you know, being completely known.
Got to jump off the cliff at some point.
Right. I mean, I remember reading Saint Benedict's Rule and being like, this is really creepy. There are whole sections devoted to the stalker angels that are always with you. You know, kind of like Santa Claus, like watching to see if you've been good or bad. And I'm like, and I remember sitting there and I'm staring at Bob Benson, who was a devout Catholic. And I'm like, so this is nuts, right? And he's like, think a little bit bigger, Marie. It's not just a stalker angel. Think about what it means to be known. And then he kind of like stomped his foot and was like, you get more reading, Marie. I love that man.
That's because he didn't put up with your mess.
I mean, no. He did not. Yeah. So there was also like the painful ordeal of being known by Bob Benson.
You might want to clarify, Bob Benson was an English professor at Sewanee.
Yeah. Right. And ultimately my freshman thesis advisor.
Well, I think you make an important point though, Marie, and Janet too, about vulnerability. Marie said it's required. It is required. But it's not required that we open ourselves to every possible attack out there. The vulnerability that's required is the one Jesus demonstrated. So he goes from Maundy Thursday demonstrating what it means to be a leader of this way, the way of Jesus. He goes away, sets himself some time apart for reflection on what's about to happen, and he does know. And then he demonstrates the kind of vulnerability we all have to practice. We have to go into prayer. We have to invite our awareness into the presence of God and lay ourselves bare, knowing we have no power in the presence of God. And then finding our way from the fear of that and the separateness of that into your will, not mine, be done. And the trust to be able to walk back out, back into the rest, knowing that he was not alone. And his vulnerability gave him a power that didn't exist in him before that, because it was divine. It was the divine power in him. And one of the things the church does, and I have to say even the Episcopal Church does this, and it's very sad to me. So wherever I go, I do this. I make sure it happens, is we skip over Holy Saturday. We have a very short Holy Saturday service where we have to wait in that terrible discomfort of Jesus is dead. The hope is dead. And there's that emptiness of that moment prior to the resurrection that happens either at the Great Vigil or Easter Day, the next day. But walking through Holy Week and leaving out Holy Saturday is not fair to us as people. Jesus demonstrated everything we need to do every step of the way. And if we leave off the one that we just don't like, and it's short and it's Saturday, and who needs that? We steal from ourselves something really important in the whole process from Maundy Thursday through the resurrection. But it's the key of that is what Marie said about the vulnerability, laying ourselves bare before God and saying, I don't want to do this. It's hard. I'm afraid. It's going to hurt. And then being able, with the confidence of the divine spirit within, to go ahead and do it anyway.
I'm still not signing up to be crucified, Mama Valerie.
You don't have to be crucified.
I'm just not.
You have to die to self in order to live. And that hurts us just as much as nails going through our hands. is this concept I have of myself. Right. Susanna says there's no shortcuts.
Right. I mean, Buddha says this. That's the point of, the absence of self.
Well, in the Star Trek session last night, Nog didn't he tell Vic? He admitted to Vic that he was afraid of dying. If that could happen to me, all these other things can happen. And so he showed his vulnerability, and perhaps I don't know that much about Ferengis. Maybe they don't usually do that, but he did that in that session. So
most people don't either. We've set up our culture where you can't be afraid. Right. You're weak, or you're not faithful.
You're weak. You're weak. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what I kind of love about what Deep Space Nine does with the Ferengi, right? Like, so again, they started out as the semi-racist stereotype in the Next Generation. And what the Ferengi end up doing is they hold up this mirror to us, right? And they flip the narrative. If we're going to talk about narrative flipping, they flip the narrative and they're like, wait a minute, we do this, this, and this. And we have some of your same vices, but we don't go as far as you do.
Right.
Ever. We never did that.
Right. Yeah.
And it's really, I think part of the vulnerability that we have to have is, not just comparing ourselves.
My girls, our girls, Ganan.
Yes. And well.
Yeah, Jess, I've been hanging with your mom.
And so have I.
Hands down here, you can't see it.
I see. Ganan, you look a lot like the camera.
Yeah, well, yeah. Thank you, Jess.
But it's a good look, Mom, really.
Yeah, I know. It is frustrating because it worked this afternoon. So I don't know. It'll go back. It'll go to Florida with me.
That's all right. That's all right. Thank you.
Good to see. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, I legit don't even know where I was going with that. I had just been completely derailed. But I think we were talking about vulnerability. But vulnerability isn't just being dying to the self before God, but it's also accepting, I think, our hand in things and our own flaws.
Right.
In putting in in what our desires were and putting ourselves in the situations in which we find ourselves, and sometimes I think accepting responsibility for that is incredibly hard because you don't want to be wrong, you don't want it to be your fault, you don't want it to be whatever, but you still have to sit with that, and you still have to work through it.
You can't work through it until you acknowledge it, and that's what you're talking about. Is Jung would say recognizing our dark side. We have it, and as long as we pretend it's not there, it's like what's coming up with all this racism stuff right now. I'm not a racist. I love everybody, except that I am everybody is, and we have to get in touch with how is that happening in me, because I can't work through it until I acknowledge that it's there.
Yeah, and then once you make that acknowledgement, you have to really grapple with the fact that now that you know that there's something you've got to work on, you also have to be part of dismantling structures that are enabling that kind of racism.
Yes.
And sometimes that seems really big and scary, and sometimes it's but it's not something we have to do. It's not always just a question of ripping down statues. Sometimes it's a question of making sure somebody else gets a foot in the door, or somebody else gets to talk more than you do.
But ripping down that statue was pretty darn amazing. I gotta admit, and she did it quoting a song.
She did, yeah. She did. I mean, yeah. Emily. Some days there's something appealing about playing piñata with a Confederate general. I'm not gonna lie, but you know. Like I said, I'm a little on the weird side.
Hey, they changed the name of the Kirby Smith house.
Mhm.
Yeah.
They actually have taken down a number of things.
Mhm.
A number of things, and they were very nice about it. They wrote very articulate letters about it, but basically, you know, turned it over to the archives and were like, yeah, this goes there now. We don't want to forget. We also don't want this image to
Right.
be what people see
Right.
and what we are,
Glorify it. Yeah.
which I think is awesome. Go them.
Seriously.
I have a lot of faith. I have a lot of faith. There's we've got good eggs coming. They're bad eggs, but we got good eggs. I mean, I say this as someone who's gone through the Sewanee archives, and there's a lot of Confederate nonsense in there.
Yeah, Convocation Hall was pretty hard to walk into that first time. My first day of seminary.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But it's gone, right? That big, huge portrait of General Polk.
Yep. I think it is. I haven't been back in.
I'm pretty sure it is. Brigady spoke to our clergy group here in Missouri, and I think he said that it came down. They took it down, along with some other things.
I think we're going through kind of a generational period of reflection.
But see, that goes back to what we were just talking about. That portrait has, so there's this like, I don't know, 10, 12, 15 feet tall portrait of
That
this
huge portrait, yes.
Confederate general who was a bishop in the Episcopal Church. So Bishop General Polk is up there. And had been
Also, coincidentally, kind of a moron.
And
no, I'm serious. Like, I've actually seen the cannonball that killed him. And like, it only killed him because he was too stupid to stay. Like, I mean, literally, he's standing on top of Lookout Mountain looking down at Yankee soldiers going, here I am. And then somebody like takes aim. Come on, y'all.
Anyway, it was there. And so the entire 3 years I was there, seminary, it was there. And we didn't have to use that hall much, but it was our first day, our last day, and a couple in between. And I would walk in, and not being raised in the South, for me, it was like a punch in the gut every time I walked in and tried not to look at that wall. But there was no awareness of that image. It had been recreated into a beloved image by the school until some Black leadership at the school said, this has got to go. Here's why. Put it into words. And then the awareness shifted. But that's what we were saying before. You can't work on something you don't know isn't there. Is there?
Very true.
Yeah, that went dark.
It's not dark. That's the hope, isn't it? I mean,
Yes, the hope is that you develop the awareness.
Yeah.
And then that you have the wisdom to make good decisions in changing awareness of others.
Right. And shying away with it and shying away from it, not acknowledging it, does nobody any good. I mean, that I think is also part of, you have to take up that cross and carry it as well.
Yes.
And you have to grapple with it. You've got to grapple with, where you fit in all of these different schemes.
Well, and if you just stand on the sidelines and watch it happen, you are as complicit as those who are making it happen. So, once your eyes are open, you really do need to make you need to be part of the change, or you're just complicit in it.
Yes.
Yep. And that's tough. That's a tough thing to swallow too. That's a tough thing to swallow. You know, like I've loved my podcast for a lot of reasons, but one of them is that it has given me the opportunity to talk very honestly about experiences and work with, you know, people of color, and to sit and listen, which I think is the biggest part of it, is to sit and listen, and, you know, also to elevate their voices.
Amen. Listening not defensively, but openly.
Not defensive.
I mean, and that's true in any argument, right? Like, I mean, you know, marital, friend, societal, and that's a hard thing to do.
That's why we don't do it alone. We do it in community, and we do it in the power of the Spirit. Otherwise, we really can't do it. It would overwhelm us. It would.
Right.
I mean, that's why we're sitting here and having this chat, right? Like, that's part of it.
That is the upside and the downside of COVID. The upside is that we have the technology to be able to talk to each other when we are so distant. Even though we have a blank picture right now, but whatever. but also COVID also isolated everybody at the same point. Yeah. So it was like the double-edged sword. Yeah. And when you remove yourself from community, because you cannot worship in a vacuum. You have to worship in community. That's why they call it community. Exactly. And that's what I think that's what Nog had to come. He was trying to be alone, and he discovered he couldn't be alone. He had to have some community, or had to at least work towards having some community. He had to learn to function in this environment, and he had to prove to the other people that he had value. Whether he was a perfect person or not was immaterial, or whether he was a whole person or not was immaterial. But he had to find self-worth.
I think he had to find self-worth, but I don't think he had to prove to Starfleet. I think everybody else came at it with the assumption that he did have worth. The problem was convincing himself.
Yeah. Yeah, they saw in him things he didn't see in himself. That's true.
And that's part of, and you know, like Janet talked about, you know, accepting help and accepting, you know, other people's wisdom. And God knows it's not like you haven't talked to me about accepting the wisdom that you passed down. but yeah, like, I mean, sometimes it's hard to see, you know, your worth and what you offer and how good you are.
And there are times when you will see it, and then it comes back later, and you realize, oh,
yeah. And that's when you have to, and that's when you have to accept that help. You have to accept that affection. You have to accept that love in that community. You have to be open to that.
And then you have to hope that other person doesn't say, I told you so.
I don't have that hope. I don't have that hope ever.
Yeah.
I mean, you just need a sign, right? So you can just hold it up. You know, like there's one that says, I told you so. And then the other one is, I think I said
that. Marie, in about 25 years, you'll see.
Exactly.
It's not science.
which means by that point, I will have my signs. They will be ready. They will be bedazzled, because by God, they need to sparkle. And that's what we're going to do.
Well, friends, this has been another wonderful discussion. So great to be able to do Lent like this together. And Gnan, you're right. I am so grateful that while Zoom did, the pandemic did a whole lot to disrupt community, it built a whole new kind so that you and I can
Yes.
share Lent together after 30 something years. It's great. Great.
Gosh, have y'all been gone 30 years?
20.
20.
Let's
Okay.
not do, can we not do this math? Because I'm still in denial.
Oh, please, please, just don't.
I'm still in denial.
My children are in graduate school and a junior.
Missed that. What?
My children are in graduate school
And a junior in college. So yeah, just let's not talk math.
Don't blame. Anyway, this has been so wonderful. Marie, you were fantastic. I knew you would be. And
I think I'm very serious. Thank you for the forum. Thank you for, giving me the opportunity and kind of compelling me to reflect a bit more than I usually do. I think this was far more valuable to me than giving up chocolate.
your reflection is a great gift to us. Thank you.
You have done a good job.
I'm so sorry I missed it. Like, this was amazing.
Yes.
There are videos, Stephanie.
Yes, there
Yes,
are. I'll post them on our
absolutely.
website. And soon I have to get that first one loaded up, but then you can watch the rest of the discussions that we had, except for the first one. We forgot to record the first one, so I forgot to.
It's okay. I have
So Marie re-recorded her.
transcript, not transcript, the paper.
I gave her the checks that Marie sent me.
Oh,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
What's going to be the next topic of discussion? Do we have to wait for next Lent?
Well, no. You can always check in with me, Ganan, and we'll see what we're up to. I haven't thought of the next one. I'm right now thinking about as far as Easter. That's it.
Okay.
Ooh, I don't believe it.
But we
Right now, I'm thinking as far as Friday.
I'm thinking as far as my next article deadline, which is tomorrow morning.
We'll get to see and stop the recording.